Hello, BookTube. I have some mail once again to show you a few packages that maybe might have things of interest, and also some periodicals that came. I got, for instance, the Bedford Times Press from Bedford, Iowa, where every week my column appears. To my great delight, let me show you how it looks. This is my Ex Libris column. They give me nice, generous amount of space every week. And your newspaper can as well. If you have a local newspaper that is crying out for interesting original content. This is all general bookish stuff. It's not the latest news. It's not reviews. It's totally applicable in all time zones. And I'm sure that the editor of whatever local newspaper you have in mind will find my rates quite reasonable. So that is always great. Like I always say, I always make a snotty comment about how the week's periodical mail really isn't complete unless you're getting your own work in the mail. It really isn't the same. But I also got the new Vanity Fair, and I'm a little disappointed because it's not the issue that I've been reading about. Is it possible that that's the next issue? This is not the one with the long story about Ezra Miller. I'm sure it'll be interesting. I'm sure there's lots of stuff in it that I will like, but it was kind of anticlimactic. I was kind of looking forward to that Ezra Miller expose. And I also got the Martha's Vineyard Gazette. This is the old-style broadsheet newspaper published on the island of Martha's Vineyard, where I am the book reviewer. I haven't had a book review in a while. The season is over, and that tends to hurt things. But I nevertheless need to pester my editor, see if there's something something on his desk that maybe I can review. Of course, as you can tell from the photograph on the cover, and if you didn't already know, Martha's Vineyard is in the news. Martha's Vineyard made the news this week because Florida's fascist governor, Ron DeSantis, had a group of migrants shipped practically in cattle cars. You know that he wished that he could have used a cattle car to Martha's Vineyard with no warning to the officials there, and having lied to them. He induced them onto the planes where he spent a huge amount of Florida taxpayer money in the full physical manifested exercise of his own bigotry. I wonder that Floridians aren't more angry about that than they are. Not that it would do any good. But he sent a plane load of these migrants to Martha's Vineyard, an island off the coast of Massachusetts that is in the off-season, where plenty of people who love the vineyard can't afford to stay in the off-season because there are no resources, there's no work. He did it to be cruel. He did it to get a laugh out of his fellow bigots, his fellow racists. And also he did it clearly to provoke from what he considered to be a liberal bastion of the folks at Martha's Vineyard, howls of racist outrage. He wanted to pull the mask off because his operating assumption in the world is that everyone is as filthily racist as he is. And that didn't happen. Instead, the vineyarders who learned about this on the fly with no preparation did what they could until they could move the immigrants. These migrants cannot possibly stay in the vineyard. Like I said, people who live on the vineyard and love it can't stay in the off-season, plenty of them. There aren't the resources for people. So they were moved to a military base on Cape Cod. Cape Cod is very close to Martha's Vineyard, so it's not hard. Cape Cod is about as close to Martha's Vineyard as the nearest sanctuary city would have been to Texas or to Florida. The point wasn't that. The point wasn't get these people to the nearest place where bigots weren't in charge and so they could be helped. The point was to make them suffer, and that didn't work. And the migrants in question have been encouraged to file a class action lawsuit against Florida's fascist governor, Ron DeSantis, for human trafficking, for kidnapping. The minute that I heard this story, I thought, kidnapping. That's kidnapping. Because they made stops in between where they took off and when they landed in Martha's Vineyard, and I guarantee you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I guarantee you that they were not allowed to leave either the plane or the surroundings of the plane in those stops. Well, if you're not allowed to leave someplace, if someone prevents you from leaving someplace where you want to leave and there's no operative reason not to, you've been kidnapped. I guarantee you that those migrants were told at their various stops that they couldn't leave. So the very first thing that came to my mind was kidnapping. I didn't think about human trafficking, although that is obviously also true. There are words in the human trafficking world. There are terms, phrases, motives, and behaviors in that world that hunters of human traffickers and also prosecutors of human traffickers use all the time. And they've all gone on record now saying this is that. This is what we do all the time. It doesn't matter who did it, except in this case it does matter who did it, because Florida's fascist governor Ron DeSantis is not subject to U.S. law. He owns the courts in his state. They are all personneled by people who have taken personal loyalty oaths to him, not to the Constitution of Florida, not certainly to the Constitution of the United States of America, and not even to Donald Trump, who is a demigod, a messiah figure to a lot of them, but directly to Ron DeSantis, who knows exactly where their families, their dependents, their children, their dogs all live. And so the courts are all his. The legislature is entirely his. And he also has a private standing army that also has sworn loyalty to him and not to law and order or to the citizens of Florida. So unless he makes the mistake of leaving the jurisdiction to someplace that without an extensive Praetorian bodyguard, or unless the federal government sends in troops to have a street-by-street firefight in the streets of Tallahassee, unless one of those two things happens, then A, Ron DeSantis is never going to leave power in Florida except for more power. And B, you could bring all the class action lawsuits that you want. He'll just ignore them. He'll wipe his arse with them. He'll ignore them and there will be no repercussions whatsoever. There can't be. He can't be touched in his own state. But you still can't help but, like, somebody on Twitter said that Massachusetts residents are really irritated because someone found a way to make other people realize that they're secretly nice. I kind of nodded in sympathy with that. And then the last periodical that we got is the TLS, the London Times Literary Supplement, here about the Queen. The former poet laureate Andrew Motion has a piece in here. Jane Ridley has a piece in here. The historian Jane Ridley has a piece in here. Just sort of reflecting, initial reflections. It's when a public figure dies, you often say that the reflections that come out immediately afterwards are initial reflections, but in this case, the Queen was almost 100. So these initial reflections have had time to marinate. I haven't read anything in here yet, except the letters page. I have to share a bit from the letters page with you, because it's also about the Queen. It's specifically about the Queen's reading, about what reading she's done as a person. And it comes from Rory Johnston in Hollywood, California. This seems an appropriate moment to reflect on Queen Elizabeth II's connection to literature. Alan Bennett's The Uncommon Reader was based on the premise that the Queen was not well read. I would argue that's not what that book is based on, but that's okay. You could certainly read it that way, I think. I can refute that. In December 1975 at Reba, the Queen presented Michael Scott, the best-known architect in Ireland for much of the 20th century, with a Royal Gold Medal in commemoration of European Architectural Heritage Year. Her Majesty said, "Oh, Mr. Scott, how interesting. You live in Martello Tower that for a time was home to my favorite author, James Joyce." Scott himself, the letter writer goes on. Scott himself told this story to my mother, Betty Chancellor, actress at the Gate Theatre, Dublin. Scott was the architect for the rebuilding of the theatre. He used to own the Martello Tower at Sandy Cove, where Joyce spent 6 nights, though Scott lived in a house he built next door. So, it's interesting. I'm sure that is not the only anecdote like that we will get. We will be flooded with them. We have already been flooded with them. But the alarming thing for me is that it indicates that Queen Elizabeth II considered James Joyce to be her favorite author. That's not good news. Here's hoping that's not true. But then we have packages. So let's go through some packages here. See what books we have and whether or not they're of any interest. What is this first one? I'll just make a mess on the floor here in the little book room, and then I'll clean up after. So this comes out. This is the University of Virginia Press. This comes out in hardcover in mid-October. And it's by David Marchik with Alexander Tippett and A.J. Wilson, with a foreword by Ken Burns, and it is called The Peaceful Transfer of Power, an oral history of presidential transitions. The transfer of power from one president to the next has been a foundation of our democracy since George Washington. This moment is delicate and hazardous period for the nation. The 9/11 Commission warned the time of transition is a great vulnerability for our country. Yes, the 9/11 Commission warned about that because they were worried about a strike from an enemy force. That's exactly what happened. Historian Ted Widmer went even further. We are vulnerable during a transition, but we are especially vulnerable during a bad transition. There's only been one. The world witnessed this vulnerability firsthand in 2020 when President Donald Trump refused to accept the outcome of the election, resulting in the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol and constituted perhaps the worst crisis for American democracy since the Civil War. No, no, it was the worst crisis for American democracy ever. The Civil War was a group of states trying to peel off from the others, and a great debate over whether or not that was possible. But the election was still held. I don't like the pussyfooting either there, that Donald Trump refused to accept the outcome of the election, resulting in the January 6th insurrection. He refused to accept the result of the election, and then he incited the January 6th insurrection. He did both those things. It's not like one resulted from the other in the way that, distantly, like a mudslide results from strong rains the year before. He was personally responsible for doing both things. He directly did both things. Just despite a presidential transition being a critical part of the political cycle, its day-to-day process remains poorly understood, even by government specialists. That is why the nonpartisan nonprofit Partnership for Public Service launched its Center for Presidential Transition and created Transition Lab, a podcast series that ran through January 2021. Okay, so is this sort of the book? Oh goodness, what's happening with the light? Is this sort of the book version of Podcast Lab, of Transition Lab? Okay, the Peaceful Transfer of Power now puts those distinct interviews into a narrative format. Okay, so this is the book version of that podcast with all interviews of all kinds of experts. Relating the story of every modern presidential transition since Carter, while also looking back on history's most challenging transitions, such as Buchanan to Lincoln and Hoover to Roosevelt. Okay, well, this comes out in, the date on it is October 11th. Probably that will be adhered to. This will be transcripts from a podcast. That's not really a book. But I'll read it anyway. I'll read it probably in the new month. I don't know if I'll get the finished copy of this. I don't think I've ever dealt with the University of Virginia Press before, or not often. We'll see. We'll see. I'll read it in October. The thing that I won't have any patience for, the thing that I will rip the book to shreds for if it does, is to say things happened. If it says, yeah, there were peaceful transfers of power, and then after the 2020 election, some things happened, and they were really important. They were historically important, and well, let's examine them. Let's talk about the things that happened. Like we're talking about hail. We're not. I want the book to talk about things that Donald Trump did. He orchestrated from months ahead of time. He planned, he instigated, and then he incited a violent insurrection to overthrow the government of my country and install himself illegally as a dictator, presumably for life. When would he leave power if he enters it that way? And is still a free man. He is still going about the country to his Klan rallies saying that he is president, that Joe Biden is not the legitimate president. That is sedition. He should be arrested the next time he says it. But he did all of that. it's not that there were peaceful transfers of power and then, some hail fell, and we'll get to the bottom of it someday. He did it on camera. But maybe this book doesn't do that. So we're having light issues, aren't we? I do not have the energy to fix light issues, so we're going to have to deal with it. I always console myself that you don't come to this channel for the great visuals. And I'm not anywhere else. I'm not going anywhere else. I'm staying right here. So, okay, I think we saw this already. Do I have a sheet for this? No, I don't. Okay, that's kind of odd. Well, all right. This is, I don't have a sheet for this. I don't have any information, but I'm pretty sure this is a September release. This is by Matthew Delmont, and it is Half American, the epic story of African Americans fighting in World War II at home and abroad. It's an epic story. It's also unbelievably fascinating. This is not, okay, the back of the book is covered in blurbs. Fantastic. Great. So I don't have the sheet, but let's just read from the dust jacket like you would in a bookstore. More than 1 million black soldiers served in World War II. Black troops were at Normandy, Iwo Jima, and the Battle of the Bulge, serving in segregated units and performing unheralded but vital support jobs, only to be denied housing and educational opportunities on their return home. Without their crucial contributions to the war effort, the United States could not have won the war, and yet the stories of these black veterans have long been ignored, cast aside in favor of the myth of the good war fought by the greatest generation. Half American is American history as you've likely never read it before. In these pages are stories of black heroes such as Thurgood Marshall, chief lawyer for the NAACP, who investigated and publicized violence against black troops and veterans; Benjamin Davis, leader of the Tuskegee Airmen, who was at the forefront of the years-long fight to open the Army Air Forces to black pilots; Ella Baker, a civil rights leader who advocated on the home front for black soldiers, veterans, and their families; James Thompson, a 26-year-old whose letter to a nation laying bare the hypocrisy of fighting for fascism abroad when racism still reigned at home set in motion the Double Victory campaign; and poet Langston Hughes, who worked as a war correspondent for the black press. Their bravery and patriotism in the face of unfathomable racism is both inspiring and galvanizing, and this is their story. Fantastic. Fantastic. So who is the author? Matthew Delmont is the Sherman Fairchild Distinguished Professor of History at Dartmouth College. He's a Guggenheim Fellow and an expert on African American history and the history of civil rights. Okay. You don't get credentials much better than that. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Washington Post, and on NPR. And he earned his BA from Harvard and his MA and PhD from Brown. Okay, so the short version of all of that is that he knows what he's talking about. The only thing left after those, that is one hell of a CV. The only thing left after that is this engaging. The subject is inherently fascinating. Just a stain of shame on, as the dust jacket puts it, the greatest generation and the good war. But that'll only get you in the door, right? The subject is fascinating, but I feel certain that, especially since it sounds from the dust jacket like the author is taking a narrative approach rather than statistical or detached, and that is good because I've read some of these stories and they're fascinating. Great. Okay, Half American. All right. I'm running out of steam, so that's good because I'm running out of packages too. So let's do this next one. We've only got 2 more to go here. Oh. Okay. All right. This next one is something we've already seen on this channel, not as a book, just me showing you the cover and enthusing and squealing like a child. Now I get to show it in real life. This is an October release. This is the new Stacy Schiff. This is The Revolutionary, Her Life of Samuel Adams. That is the cover. There is an etching of an etching of an etching of an etching. Samuel Adams literally did not look anything like the person on the cover there, but that's all right. That's okay. Pretty confusing as to why that would be chosen. And of course, this is an advanced copy, so there won't be any other artwork. But it's good enough. And there were portraits of Samuel Adams taken in his own lifetime. Up on that wall behind that plant is one of those portraits. You'd think that would be on the cover of this, but instead, we have Gabriel Byrne. This is Stacy Schiff's new book. Now, on this channel, I talk often about credit in the Bank of Steve. If an author has pleased me, then I'm going to be pleased. I'm going to go into their book, extremely favorably inclined. They're going to have to make a lot of missteps to lose me. And no one's credit could be higher than Stacy Schiff's. Good Lord. So when I got word that her new book was about Samuel Adams, so let's see here. Thomas Jefferson asserted that if there was any leader of the revolution, Samuel Adams was the man. John Adams thought his cousin the most sagacious politician of all. With high-minded ideals and bare-knuckle tactics, Adams led what could be called the greatest campaign of civil resistance in American history. That's entirely true. He did the work that Jefferson and his cousin John Adams were unwilling to do. He went to the taverns. He talked to the farmers. He talked to the merchants. He made the case, long before Thomas Paine wrote a word, that what's going to happen here, what has to happen, what you actually want to happen, whether you realize it or not, is a break with Great Britain, a break with King George, where we become a country of our own. That idea took a lot of prep work. It didn't spring to life in 1774. Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer Stacy Schiff returns Adams to his seat of glory, introducing us to the shrewd, eloquent, intensely disciplined man who supplied the moral backbone of the American Revolution. Oh, I like the sound of that. Not the eloquent part, because he wasn't eloquent. He was a notoriously cautious speaker. But the moral backbone of the American Revolution is very good. A singular figure at a singular moment, Adams packaged and amplified the Boston Massacre. He helped to mastermind the Boston Tea Party. He employed every tool in an innovative arsenal to rally a town, a colony, and eventually a band of colonies behind him, creating the cause that created a country. Oh, this is good stuff. For his efforts, he became the most wanted man in America. When Paul Revere rode to Lexington in 1775, it was to warn Samuel Adams that he was about to be arrested for treason. Yes, for the whole course of the war, he was referred to as the dangerous Adams. It wasn't John Adams that was referred to that way. In this book, Stacy Schiff brings her masterful skills to Adams' improbable life, illuminating his transformation from aimless son of a well-off family to tireless, beguiling radical who mobilized the colonies. Okay, all right, well, this comes out in October. I'll be reviewing it for the Christian Science Monitor, and I'm overjoyed about that. Overjoyed. Ordinarily, I'll review things anywhere, whatever. But if it's a book that I have a feeling I'm going to love this, and it's a brand new biography of Samuel Adams, who hasn't had one in 20 years, when it comes to a book like that you're sort of behind, unless this is just a catastrophic misstep, which I can't imagine. When it comes to a book that you're kind of behind, you want the biggest platform readily available. And, much as I hate to say it, that is not Big Canoe News in Northern Georgia. That is the Christian Science Monitor for me. But this will be reviewed absolutely everywhere. The Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, everybody will do this. The Philadelphia Inquirer, of course, will do it. The Boston Globe, of course, will do it. But let's finish up with this this last one here. Oh wow! Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. Okay, I don't have a sheet for this either. Okay, fantastic. This is the new book by Max Hastings, the historian Max Hastings that is so popular, so well known to so many history fans. His new book is The Abyss. This also comes out in October. This is his book on the Cuban Missile Crisis. So you have Castro, you have Nikita Khrushchev, and you have John F. Kennedy. It's a big book on the Cuban Missile Crisis, so it is probably the highest profile Kennedy book that will come out this year. And I'm also reviewing this one for the Monitor. So two of the things that I'll be reviewing for the Monitor in October could not be more quintessentially Steve books if they tried. There's one on Samuel Adams, one of my 5 guys. And there's one on the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Kennedy book. So let's read about this. Fantastic. Okay, so I don't have the finished copy of the Stacy Schiff yet. That's all right. One of the most terrifying moments came on October 18th when President John F. Kennedy and his advisors discussed the prospect of U.S. forces invading Cuba to remove the missiles secretly deployed there, and the Soviets would seize West Berlin. Robert Kennedy asked, "Then what do we do?" General Maxwell Taylor, chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, "Go to general war if it's in the interest of ours." The president asked disbelievingly, "You mean nuclear exchange?" Taylor shrugged. "Guess you have to." His words highlight the madness that overtook some of the key players of both sides. Mercifully, JFK recoiled from the soldiers' view, saying, "Now the question really is to what action we take which lessens the chances of nuclear exchange, which obviously is the final failure." Because then, as now, he had military people in the U.S. establishment, but also obviously in all other military establishments, saying that there's such a thing as limited nuclear war. There's a nuclear war that you could win. That's absurd. It's 10 times as absurd now as it was then, but it was absurd then. Max Hastings' graphic new history tells the story from the viewpoints of national leaders, Soviet officers, Cuban peasants, American pilots, and British disarmers. He deploys his accustomed blend of eyewitness interviews, archived documents and diaries, White House tape recordings, and top-down analyses first to paint word portraits of the Cold War experiences of Fidel Castro's Cuba, Khrushchev's Russia, and Kennedy's America, then to describe the nail-biting 13 days in which Armageddon beckoned. I have written about the Cuban Missile Crisis many, many times. I have reviewed, I think, the last 4 or 5 major books for one venue or another. And I've read everything. This thing will have a huge bibliography. I'm sure that I've read everything in that bibliography, so I'm, needless to say, overjoyed at the chance to review this. so that's great. The last 2 books are both things that I'll be reviewing. We have The Abyss by Max Hastings. We have the ARC of The Revolutionary. I'll get the finished copy of that in due time. It's an October release. I would hope that I get the finished copy soon. Then Half American, Matthew Delmont's history of black soldiers during World War II, and The Peaceful Transfer of Power, a thing that used to happen in the United States where the defeated president conceded and offered his help and the help of all of his followers to support the new president who was facing a terrible job. That peaceful transfer of power, that concession and then offer of help and support is never going to happen again in American politics. That is over. Fortunately, we're not going to have long to mourn it. so because other things that have never happened before are also going to happen very soon. So this feels already like a weird anachronism. Like if Cicero had written a book saying, well, looking back on the prescriptions of Sulla, and saying, boy, oh boy, that was just about the lowest point that Rome has ever reached. It'd be if you wrote a book like that, knowing that Julius Caesar was going to turn it into a monarchy right after he wrote the book, his book would feel a little strange. It would feel a little anachronistic, and this already does. But those are our books for today, plus some periodicals. This has gone on way too long. I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.